Margot beamed proudly, sipping her cherry slush drink. She just added more lines to her Cox mobile plan and saved, making her feel exquisite. Visit a Cox store today. Prices exclude taxes, device activation, and other fees and charges. Other terms and conditions apply.
Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AI Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our quick publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AI Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AI Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Rival Recon here on Anfield Index Pro. I'm Harry Sethi. With the Reds re-establishing their 5-point lead at the top of the Premier League table with an emphatic 4-1 win over Chelsea on Wednesday evening, Klopp's side turned their attention to Arsenal as the Reds travel to the Emirates this Sunday for a huge afternoon clash. Joining me on the pod this week to discuss Arsenal's season to date, whether they still consider themselves to be in the title race, and whether trade-offs in favour of solidity have come at the expense of their attacking verve. I'm delighted to welcome on Chief Arsenal writer for Football London, Kayak, to have this conversation with me. Welcome on, Kayak. Good to speak with you.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, it's been a while in the making. In terms of sort of getting various folks on to chat about Arsenal over the past couple of seasons, and it's been interesting having a chat with obviously journalists or fans just to discuss the progress, the sort of huge development that the club's made over those past few seasons. This season feels like it's an especially competitive one for not only the top 4 spots, but like at the moment the title as well. And I just wanted to ask you, I mean, like currently obviously Arsenal third in the league, 22 games played, 46 points. We'll come on to talk about all the different narratives we could talk about ahead of the weekend's game, but where are your thoughts on where Arsenal find themselves at the moment? Obviously had a huge deal of momentum, I'd say sort of prior to Christmas, and then had a shaky patch, and now seem to be trying to rebuild that.
Yeah, it might sound strange to say for a team that is, like you say, close to the top of the league, comfortably qualified for the Champions League round of 16, obviously won out of both domestic cups, but I don't think that was particularly ever their aim for the season. But it has been, I think, a little bit disappointing for Arsenal this season. They've had bright spots. So beating Manchester City was a real high earlier in the season, and they've had moments and glimpses where they've looked really good. But Arsenal's big issue has been they haven't been able to find a consistency when it comes to the attack. And whereas last season there was so much free-flowing attacking football and it was really exciting to watch, this season has been, I guess, a little bit more dull. Mikel Arteta, I think, would argue more controlled, and I think he's happy with that. There's less of those roller coaster games where, I don't know, like Bournemouth last season where Arsenal scored in the last minute, or all those draws that Arsenal had in a row where their title seemed to fall away. You know, I remember the game at Anfield last season, which was a fantastic match, and then Southampton and West Ham after that. There's less of those kind of games. There's more tight 1-0, 2-1, 0-0 kind of games that I think maybe are less appealing on the eye, but from a managerial standpoint will be a lot more pleasing because the team is following their tactical instructions to the nth degree. It is creating a bit of a problem in the final third, though. And goal scoring has been an issue a bit all season for Arsenal, and they're struggling on that front. So I think given the progress that was made last season and the amount that was spent in the summer and the excitement about Arsenal's business in the summer, I think many would have maybe expected Arsenal to be a little bit better this season. But that's not to say they've been bad. They've just maybe not been as exciting as some might have hoped for. But like I say, there's pros and cons to that.
Yeah, because I think you mentioned it, and I think the context is interesting because obviously 5 points off the top of the league at the moment. That's not cut adrift by any stretch of the imagination. You mentioned the progress in Europe. The first season back in the Champions League for a number of years as well. I'm interested in sort of where that, it's not overriding negativity, but where that sort of slight negativity is coming from. Do you think it's mostly down to that style theme in terms of Arsenal having had that more expansive, free-flowing attack last season. The likes of Martinelli and Saka, certainly Martinelli, seeming to be more like empowered, like more involved in terms of the number they're producing in the final third, as opposed to this season where, as you talk about, we see with many sides that push for the title, as fun as it is to imagine you can do it just with the attack, very often it's not. It is that middle of the field. It is the defense that will ultimately keep you up there in contention for longer in the season. Do you think that's where the negativity is really coming from then, in terms of like people like longing for some of that attacking verve of last season?
Yeah, possibly. I think maybe I should roll back a little bit on saying how disappointing and negative it's been, like I did in my first answer, because it is important to highlight that, maybe for all the offensive sacrifices, Arsenal have been brilliant defensively this season, and they've controlled games and smothered teams, and very few teams have been able to better Arsenal. Even the teams they've lost to, they've been in every single game pretty much, except for Fulham, where they were completely outplayed. So from that perspective, I think Arsenal will be relatively happy. And I wouldn't say the mood around the club and the fan base is particularly down, and they're thinking, God, Liverpool's coming up, we're going to lose that one, we're going to lose this one, we're going to lose that one. I don't think that's quite the mentality, but equally, I don't think there's quite the sense of confidence that you might expect for a team that is in Arsenal's position. Like we said at the start, challenging for league titles, one of the favourites in the Champions League, they'd be fancying themselves, and I don't quite get that vibe from the fan base, at least. The mentality among the squad is certainly different from what it used to be. But I think you're right in when you say that, just sacrificing that attacking verve has maybe lost some of the magic of last season. And listen, if Arsenal do go on to win the league, I think everyone will accept that sacrifice as one that needed to be made. And Arsenal have had a lot of injuries this season. They've had key players out, whereas last season, first half of the season at least, until the very end, more or less, they were able to keep more or less their entire starting 11 fit. So prior to the World Cup, Arteta had started 8 out of the 11 players in every single match in the Premier League. This season, he's not been able to do that at all. He's, I think, only been able to field the same 11 twice in a row. So Arsenal have had to shop and change a lot. They've lost that consistency. They've lost that fluidity that was such a key component of their play last season. And I think maybe with all that going on, and maybe the expectations being so high and being so much higher now, whereas last season it was maybe a bit of a shock that Arsenal were able to go on a title race, this season it was expected. Maybe that's why some of the sheen has come off it a little bit. But it's important to stress, like I say, that it's not doom and gloom at Arsenal. It's not negative. It's not terrible. I think maybe just slightly below where people were hoping it might be at this point.
Yeah, I think it's important to emphasize that. And I've got a lot of North London members of my extended family. My Liverpool supporting credentials come from my dad, but the rest of my family, having grown up in North London, there's a large Arsenal contingent, and I think you're right. For me, not that they represent the entire base, the fan base, but what I've sensed from them, it was before Christmas, perhaps this slight unease with sort of the change in playing style, but happy with that it was producing results, and sort of happy with that sort of sacrifice, and then a little bit of the confidence has shaven off since then. But I think, as you say, it's sort of very handily placed. Still lots that could transpire between now and the end of the season. I'm seeing just some quotes, because obviously we are the January window has just finished. I saw some quotes from Mikel Arteta talking about, I think it was following the Nottingham Forest win, talking around sort of the squad maybe being thin in certain areas, and it not really being possible to do any business in January, because they didn't really think that business would improve what they have. Do you get the sense that the squad is thin in certain areas? You mentioned the injuries, and I think whenever any team is going for a title charge, having luck with injuries as well as good processes is going to be essential. And I think Arsenal definitely had that last season in terms of sort of as you talked about, the number of players who were available for selection for the vast majority of the season. Did you get that impression that the squad is thin in certain areas? Do you think that some of that attacking or lack of sort of attacking ruthlessness could have been bolstered? Or do you think actually what Arteta's saying there about it being quite difficult to improve upon sort of the various members of the squad that you have is more the case?
I think both things are right, to be fair. I think there are areas that Arsenal could improve on. Defence in particular is one where the depth has been short this season. They've been desperately unlucky because they signed Yuri and Timber to solve
course.
that issue, he can play anywhere across the back line and look fantastic in pre-season. And then first game of the actual season picks up an ACL, and you've lost him for 9 months. And even that's quite a difficult one to replace, because do you go out and sign another player on a 5-year contract who's of Timber's level, or do you wait for him to come back and see if your investment that you've initially made is of the same quality as it was before the injury? And even with Timber out, Arsenal have a decent depth in the back line: Saliba, Gabriel, Kivior, Tomiyasu, Ben White, and Zinchenko. But the issue is that Ben White has struggled a little bit with injury. Alex Zinchenko and Takehiro Tomiyasu are both quite injury-prone players as well. So Arsenal have struggled a little bit at the back there, but again, that's more due to bad luck than bad planning. I think they've just been really unlucky with the defensive side of things. Up front, I think, is where you could maybe criticise them a little bit more, in terms of many people would have been able to tell you that Gabriel Jesus and Eddie Nketiah probably isn't a Premier League winning strike force, especially given that other teams have such strong strike force. So you talk about Liverpool with, their front six, even, Jota, Nunez, Salah. I'm going to try and remember them all. Gakpo, others who aren't coming to mind right now. Diaz, plenty of others, and City, obviously, with all their attacking might and Erling Haaland and all those kind of things. Other teams are going to be able to outscore Arsenal, because Arsenal don't have a killer in the box, and they've been kind of screwed by the fact that Gabriel Martinelli, as you mentioned earlier, has not been on top form this season. I think he's really struggled with the fact that teams sit back in low blocks against Arsenal, so there's no space. Saka is getting marked by 2 or 3 players per game, so it's very difficult for him. Odegaard's been in and out of form with injuries as well, and all the players who were scoring last season. Granit Xhaka was key in front of goal for Arsenal last season. He's obviously gone. So I think you could have argued that Arsenal needed a bit more up front going into the season. Many people would have said this is the team that nearly won a title last season, and it was a strike force that scored a record number of goals in Arsenal's season last season. Arsenal had never scored more Premier League goals than they did with this exact strike force last year. But looking at the players and looking at who they've got available, I think there was definitely scope for an addition up front. The issue was, having spent 105 million on Declan Rice, having spent 65 million on Kai Havertz and another 40 odd on Timber, and then committed themselves to another 30 million on David Raya, who's initially on loan, they weren't able to then go and spend on the forward areas, which I think are key if you're going to win a title. And I think that's where you can start to maybe criticise the squad planning, prioritising areas of the squad that maybe weren't a priority there and then. So you look at maybe going out and spending 65 million on Kai Havertz. He's split opinion since he's arrived. I don't think he's been too bad personally, but I don't think he's been worth the 65 million that Arsenal paid for him. And when you look at that, you see maybe could there have been a cheaper alternative that Arsenal could have got, and then they could have gone out and used some of that money to go and sign a forward who could have bolstered their ranks, because there've been plenty of games this season where you look at the bench, if Arsenal were struggling to score, those games around Christmas where they lost to West Ham and Fulham and even Liverpool in the Cup are good examples where you look to the bench and you think, what have Arsenal got beyond Jesus, Martinelli and Saka? Trossard is a good player and has scored quite a few goals this season and contributes a lot. But if he's not on form, beyond that, Reece Nelson, Eddie Nketiah, all decent players, but not players who I think you can rely upon to change games from the bench. So that's an area I'd say where Arsenal are lacking in depth in the squad. And I wouldn't say that's necessarily unfortunate, because they've made the decision to give contract extensions to Eddie Nketiah and to Reece Nelson and to plenty of those players who are in the front line. So, yeah, that's what's going on up there.
No, it's interesting to hear your perspective on it. I think Liverpool's current title charge has definitely been fueled in one part by, obviously you talk about that attacking depth, but obviously that gives you the options off of the bench. And I think the way in which Klopp has used substitutes this season has been probably more impactful than I've seen for a long time, really trying to use all 5 of them where possible. And I think what's good about those attacking options you were reading out there is that quite a few of them are very different. So that they do present different questions to a team when you throw them on. If one forward isn't necessarily asking the right sort of questions of a defense, a different forward with different styles can help shake things up. And I was looking before this at sort of just the number of players being used by teams across the league, and I think I'm right in saying that Arsenal this season actually are using a smaller crop of players between each and every game, which would make sense to your point, right? Injuries taking some toll, perhaps Are
you that person who has everything? The coolest merch and those must-have fan threads? Well, over at our Anfield Index shop, we've gone that extra mile when it comes to pimping up your Liverpool collection. From our popular range of bespoke design t-shirts, sweaters, hoodies and hats, to our signature edition mugs, prints and coasters, all provided with fast worldwide shipping. We have something for every red. We also stock official LFC merchandise and are licensed with the Premier League and UEFA to sell official iron-on shirt badges and sleeve patches. As a listener to this podcast, you can get 10% off everything with coupon code AIPRO10. Just head over to AnfieldIndex.shop or find us on Etsy by searching for Anfield Index.
A lack of depth when it comes to sort of the high quality options in different positions. And you mentioned Martinelli. He's one that's been intriguing to me, just in terms of has seemed a player low in confidence, and has seemed a player who I think has struggled from the fact that there hasn't necessarily been a obvious option to rotate with him. Yes, Trossard's come in and done well, but he has played a lot of games, Martinelli, and just I suppose the result the coaching staff are looking for from him is just to play his way through this patch. Do you think he's suffered in a certain way from Xhaka's departure, and maybe obviously a slight change in approach from Arsenal? Because from what I did see of Arsenal last season, it was Xhaka receives the ball. His very first thought was to release it quickly to Martinelli in whatever space he had, and as you pointed out, deeper defenses, more men marking you. It's been tougher for him.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. Kai Havertz has obviously been the primary replacement for Granit Xhaka in the Arsenal team this season. They've had lots of different players play that left 8 role that Xhaka played in last season, but it has primarily been Havertz, and he spends more of his time in the final third, getting on the end of crosses and balls into the box rather than providing them and setting up his teammates. I know Xhaka did his fair share of getting into the box as well last season, but Havertz primarily is doing that. Havertz is also, I think, just generally a bit slower as a player on the ball. He likes to take a few more touches. He can be a bit lethargic in his touch, and the way he presents himself on the pitch, his body language is quite languid. So it just seems like things are going slower. But I think Martinelli is a big space player. And we saw this last season where when teams left space for Arsenal because they thought they could come and have a go at Arsenal, Martinelli scored a lot of goals. He was Arsenal's top scorer last season and was one of the best players in the Premier League in terms of finishing. However, this season, where teams, like we said earlier, have sat back and blocked Arsenal, I think even with Granit Xhaka in the side, it would have been very difficult to unpick that lock, because Premier League defences are some of the best and most well-funded Premier League defences in the world right now. So that makes things very difficult for anyone to break through. And I think Martinelli has really struggled because he's a player who will often try and beat his fullback by getting to the byline, and then once he's got to the byline, he realises he can't really use his left foot, and he tries to shoot from an impossible angle, or his cross is poor. So that's been a real issue for Arsenal this season, that they've not quite had that same threat down the left-hand side. Interestingly enough, when the space has been there, so if you look at Martinelli in the Champions League, for example, where teams are more willing to come on and have a go, Martinelli scored or assisted in every single game he's played. And the final minutes against Crystal Palace, where they were kind of all over the place and they'd lost the game, and I don't really know what was happening, but they were leaving a lot of gaps, and Martinelli scored twice in injury time. So the difficulty is then Arsenal come up against a team like Nottingham Forest, who put 10 men inside the box, and I don't think many players would be able to find space, or I think most players would struggle in that scenario. So it does make things very difficult for him, but it does feel like a bit of a loss this season. And you mentioned confidence. He does look like a player who's struggling. And I remember the Arsenal game against Liverpool at Anfield just before Christmas, and Martinelli's got a great record against Trent Alexander-Arnold, and he looked really scared of that duel. He looked like he was shying away from it, and that's not really like him. And Liverpool are a kind of team who ideally, on paper, should be the kind of team Martinelli thrives against, because he's given the space, because Liverpool aren't going to sit back and defend. They're going to try and go for Arsenal, and that's the kind of thing that he should enjoy. He hasn't been able to do so that much in the Premier League, at least this season. And it has been disappointing, because Arsenal have lost one of their best goal-scoring avenues. And like we said just before, they've not really got anyone to come in and replace him.
Yeah, it's just that left side just looks sort of a little bit less, it seems like there's less depth, both in obviously Martinelli's position and Zinchenko's position, certainly. And it's just, been interesting to see him the way in which, when you're faced with that situation, sometimes you just have to ask the players to try and play through it and hope that they rediscover it. As you mentioned, at Palace, I have no idea what was happening in that last 10 minutes. It was a very, very confusing approach to a football match in the last 10 minutes. But I think Martinelli obviously made the most of that. And I think, Jack had the point around that. I just noticed that, to your point, perhaps it's even perception with Havertz in terms of sort of how quickly he releases the ball. But another point I wanted to bring up, and I spoke about this with some of the previous Arsenal guests we've spoken to this season, given how many times we've played each other. But I was interested by the decision to, and there's been lots of debate around this, but to make the move for David Raya in the summer, and to bring him in, as you said, with that obligation to buy as well. And interested on your perspective on how that move has worked out to date, whether or not you think the trade-off in his better ability on the ball has been worth it necessarily. I just found it an interesting area of the pitch to address. Could have been just a more opportunistic signing rather than one that was maybe planned very far in advance, but seemed an odd one to me, obviously, with sort of the way in which Ramsdale been playing and the confidence and seemingly just how integral he was to a real feel-good factor within the squad. Maybe I'm making too much of it, but just interested in your perspective on, like, so far anyway, how worth it that trade-off has been.
No, you're not making too much of it. It's a debate that Arsenal fans are having week in, week out, and it was an opportunistic signing. It wasn't one that they necessarily planned for months and months in advance, like some of their other deals. I think you can tell that by the way the deal was structured, in the sense that Arsenal went for the £3 million loan because they didn't have any money left to spend on David Raya, because they weren't expecting to go out and sign him this summer.
Right.
That's because, Bayern Munich were interested, Spurs were interested, Man United were interested. I think even Real Madrid showed an interest at one point, and he was fully expecting to leave Brentford, and Brentford had already signed their replacement for him in Mark Fleck, and then they were fully expecting him to go. But come August, no one had really come in for him in terms of a proper move materialising. And Spurs obviously went for Vicario, Chelsea went for Robert Sanchez, Man United went for Onana, Real Madrid went for Kepa. So Bayern went for, who did they sign in goal? Jan Sommer, I think it was. So a lot of the options that he had available to him as a potential exit avenue had closed up, and suddenly Arsenal thought, well, this is a guy we've been scouting for 3 years since he was in the Championship with Brentford. Let's try and get him in, and they were able to get that deal over the line, and they've got a really good relationship with Brentford. It's interesting that we started the podcast sort of talking about how Arsenal were much less exciting than they used to be, and much less hectic and high intensity games. And I don't think there's a position that symbolises that more than the goalkeeping position. So we remember last season, that game at Anfield, Arsenal 2-2, where second half Liverpool basically were just barraging the Arsenal goal. There was nothing Arsenal could do to get out, and Aaron Ramsdale conceded twice but had a superb game and made lots of saves, and was really
crucial ones later on, wasn't
there? Yeah. And it turned out not to be any use in the end, but as far as Arsenal were concerned, that day kept Arsenal in the title race, really. However, I don't think Mikel Arteta would have liked that, in the sense that you look now where Arsenal are playing, they don't really have those kind of games where the goalkeeper needs to make 5, 6, 7 saves to keep them in it, because they're able to control things a lot more. And people will point to the fact that maybe David Raya isn't as good a shot stopper as Aaron Ramsdale, and probably Raya wouldn't be able to pull off some of those saves that Ramsdale pulled off at Anfield last season.
But he doesn't need to be, does he?
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. It doesn't need to, because he's so good at helping Arsenal control games that they're never facing those barrages. It's difficult to remember a time where Arsenal have found themselves that much up against the cosh this season, where they've had to really dig in and defend. The times I can think of, there was a brief period at Anfield where Liverpool were on top. Right to the start of the season, they were down to 10 men against Crystal Palace, and they really sort of did, batten down the hatches and back to the wall defending. But beyond that, there's not been many games where Arsenal have really, really had to suffer defensively, and that's because they have so much control of possession, and they have so much domination of the ball. And I think people would argue that maybe Aaron Ramsdale could have pulled that off, and that the difference is probably incremental. And when you're looking at evolutions in the project and what we spoke about before in terms of where Arsenal maybe needed to allocate their budget this summer, you could argue that the goalkeeping position wasn't high on the list, and they had just extended Aaron Ramsdale's contract. So I think they would have argued that as well. However, when the opportunity came up to sign Ryan, they were always thinking about making an evolution eventually in the goalkeeping department. They've suddenly got a goalkeeper who, obviously, in terms of personality, brings a lot more calm. You mentioned Ramsdale as a leader, but he's a very hyper guy. He's very up and down. Maybe not up and down, but he's very energetic and likes to get involved with the fans and likes to G things up and likes to get the atmosphere going and thrives in those kind of atmospheres. But David Raya is not really that kind of guy. He's a bit quieter. He's a bit calmer, and I guess a bit more like the rest of the Arsenal team in terms of being just a little bit more. I don't want to say dull, but not as interesting is probably not a very nice way to describe it, but I can't think of a better way.
Yeah, system first over
exactly
the individual. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, it's I think it was. I mean, I thought lots of us. I think we had Chris Godfrey on from the Guardian earlier in the season, and he was making the comparisons. I know lots of Arsenal fans have made around the trade-off Liverpool had to make from heavy metal football, if you like, that wasn't actually quite as described at the time, but making that trade-off between attack and defense, and the importance of signings like Fabinho and Van Dijk and Alisson, who still the latter two like make up the spine of Liverpool's team, and the importance of the fact that Liverpool could then go away to let's pick a time, Newcastle, for example, be 1-0 up and go, okay, well, that's it. We'll just win this game 1-0, which wasn't a quality that the previous incarnations of that Liverpool side had necessarily. It felt horribly uncomfortable, I have to say, because you hadn't seen it as a Liverpool fan for seasons and seasons and seasons. But after a while, you sort of realised that was the approach that was going to be the one that kept us up there. And then obviously you had to rely on the attack to do their thing. On that control, I mean, it's a nice segue to it, and lots of conversation around Declan Rice, and obviously with the price tag and his impact, and seemed to settle really early, really well into the side. Interested to get your perspective on. I mean, I know he's done very well, but like how his role has it changed at all as the season's gone on? Is he now having more influence in certain areas of the pitch, or are there things that you've maybe identified about Declan Rice in this Arsenal system? Does he need certain players to complement him in that unit that you think are perhaps the best pairing for him as well?
Hi everyone. This month the channel is supporting a local charity based in Edinburgh called Steps to Hope. Steps to Hope helps support people who are experiencing homelessness and addiction. The founder of the charity, Richard Roncero, is currently doing a Sleep Rough campaign where he is sleeping rough on the streets in 8 different cities for 8 weeks. Please like, share and follow the Facebook page, and if you can, donate. Thank you.
I think he complements the others. I think he's been such a good addition to this Arsenal team, and he's played different positions. So there have been times when, let's say, Declan Rice has had to play alongside Jorginho in midfield, and he's done a really good job. And Jorginho's not the most mobile guy, so Declan Rice gives him the legs. There's been times he's played alongside Thomas Partey, and Partey's more of a technical player, and Rice is able to give him a bit more energy and combine with that technique really well. And also what Declan Rice does, which has been really important for Arsenal, is when he plays alone in that number 6 position, and I guess what Liverpool would call like a Fabinho role. He's very good at helping Arsenal win the ball high and keeping them high up the pitch. So we spoke about domination. That's been a real theme of this podcast, and he enables them to continue dominating, because when a team dares to try and counterattack Arsenal, they've got to get past the best interceptor in the Premier League. That is Declan Rice, arguably the best interceptor in world football. And he just mops up any sense of danger that exists in front of that Arsenal defence, and he can be everywhere. He's like I said, so agile, so athletic, that he really enables Arsenal to keep teams under the cosh and really not have a moment to think, because constantly with a player like Rice at the back, you can afford to barrage, and you can afford to maybe commit a few more men forward, because you've got that extra insurance policy behind you that is Declan Rice. So yeah, he's combined really well. I think Mikel Arteta would have liked to combine him a few more times. Obviously, he's been unlucky in the sense that Partey's been out injured, and I think Jorginho is 31 and maybe can't play every single game like he used to. So yeah, I think we would have liked to have seen him combine a little bit more and maybe play in the 8 position a bit more in some games and mix it up a bit. But there's not an Arsenal fan who will have a bad word to say about Declan Rice. He's been such an improvement to this Arsenal side. He's taken them to another level. And if they do go on and win the Premier League and even the Champions League as well, he'll be a huge, huge part of that because he offers them something that they simply didn't have before. And he's, again, been a huge part of that control that Arsenal are now able to exert over opposition teams.
Another player who got an opportunity against Forest, you would have seen, obviously, being at the game, was Emil Smith-Rowe. Hasn't really had much game time for a while. I think he's had his injury problems, but also sort of been working hard to try and get back into Mikel Arteta's plans, I suppose, for that first choice 11. How do you think he did? And as a player, I know he's a popular one amongst the fan base, but I mean, as a player, I mean, how do you sort of like see his future at the club? I mean, do you think he could have more of a influential role in the rest of the season?
Yeah, I thought he did pretty well against Forest. I thought he obviously started very brightly. He played the role very differently to the way Kai Havertz plays it. Havertz tends to stay in his position a bit more, tends to stay a little bit more central. Smith-Rowe was interchanged with Martinelli on the left. He was popping up on the right. He was winning balls high. He was one of the few players in that first half who was willing to take a shot for Arsenal when they were, really hammering Forest, but not really able to convert it into any opportunities. 80% possession, but only, I think, 6 shots in the first half. And I think 2 of those came from Emil Smith-Rowe and another one was assisted by him. So he was good. He was direct. I think, unsurprisingly for a player who was starting his first Premier League game since October, he fell off a bit in the second half and was taken off around the 70-minute mark. And I don't think he's got 90 minutes in his legs at the minute. And I think that is his biggest problem for Arsenal. It's not necessarily been, as people have suggested, that Mikel Arteta hates him or he doesn't like him or he doesn't want to play him or doesn't rate him. Because, let's remember Mikel Arteta was the guy whose job was essentially saved by Emil Smith-Rowe on Boxing Day. I know that's a bit simplistic and it wasn't quite that simple, but he turned things around for us on that Boxing Day against Chelsea all those years ago where, they were 16th in the league, I think, and then they went on to have a decent season and now, they built on that ever since. And Smith-Rowe is a really frustrating player for Arsenal because they're so desperate to see him succeed, but he's been so unfortunate with injury and he missed basically a whole year. He didn't start a game for Arsenal in any competition for 500 days. And that's a really long time to be out. And I think people forget that when they think, oh, he should just come back in and suddenly you snap your fingers and he's the player he was when he came into the Arsenal team. He's playing in a different... Yeah, exactly. He's playing in a different position now than he was before. So before he was on the left wing, now he's in the middle. And it's interesting to see how that's developed. Personally, I preferred him on the left wing, but I think Mikel Arteta has paid a lot more money than me to make those decisions for a reason, and I'll trust him on that front. And yeah, his difficulty will be dislodging Kai Havertz, who's a big money signing. He's also got Fabio Vieira of competition, who hadn't really done it for Arsenal yet this season, but was Mikel Arteta signing and is a player that Mikel Arteta really rates. So Smith-Rowe will have lots of competition and it'll be up to him basically to decide, does he want to play every single game or does he want to fight for his place and mix it up a bit? And I think Arteta would love to keep him. If you look at the way City have hundreds and hundreds of number 10s and players who can play in those midfield positions, Arteta would love to have something similar to that. Smith-Rowe didn't want to go anywhere this January. He was linked with some moves and there were teams interested, but he really wants to stay and try and make a fist of it as his boyhood club, and he'll have 2 years left in his contract at the end of this season. And maybe then Arsenal will start to make a decision on him, because we all know from this January window, one of the big themes has been homegrown players go down as 100% profit, and Arsenal might be interested in maybe cashing in. But I think, he's a player who Arteta really likes, and he does have a future at Arsenal. I just don't quite think it's going to be the one that's as influential as everyone hoped for when he first burst onto the scene in that COVID season.
Sure, yeah, it is really, really hard to build or to rebuild after missing that much football. I think, as you point out, it just takes time, and you need the opportunities, and they don't necessarily always come. And one thing that I want to talk about just before we move on to maybe have a look at the game itself on the weekend is, I think I'd missed it, but I'd seen some of these rumours recently around suggestions. I don't even know if there were rumours around Mikel Arteta and Barcelona, with the fact that obviously Xavi's announced that he's leaving the club this season as well. Quickly quashed, obviously, by everybody around the club, including Arteta himself. And you do look at the position that he's in at the club and the trust he clearly has with the owners, the backing he's had, and also the comfort in that role, actually. So you'd question why he would jeopardize that to go to a club that does look to be in a much more chaotic state at the moment. I wanted to get your opinion, though, because I think one aspect of it that's interesting for me is, it's one thing getting the backing from your directors of football, the people who run the club, getting the money in the transfer window, and clearly having a well liked amongst the fan base, clearly amongst the squad. I wanted to get your opinion though on the fact that how do you think Mikel Arteta is being graded at the moment in terms of the fact that he's been in the club now for a number of years, clearly developed Arsenal. I thought last season where they were ahead of schedule in terms of the progress that they made, and deserve a lot of plaudits for that. He's got consistency again this season because of where they are in the league, and still up and competing for the title. Come the end of this season, what do you think he'll be judged on in terms of, if you were grading his paper? Do you think there is going to be an increased level of scrutiny on Arteta around actually, producing the trophies in these competitions now?
Yeah, I think there will be. He'll be judged on trophies. He'll be judged on if he can win the Premier League or the Champions League, because Arsenal didn't take, well, I suppose they took the FA Cup seriously and were unlucky to go out against Liverpool. They didn't take the Carabao Cup very seriously. So those two opportunities at a trophy have gone. And coming into the season, all the discussion from the club was, we want to win the Premier League. We want to win the Champions League. We want to win all the big trophies. And then we want to right the wrongs of last season where they fell away at the very last. And that's going to be very difficult this season. But that's what Arteta is going to be judged on. And I think the important thing for Arsenal now is, and maybe from people observing Arsenal and from fans themselves, is last season it was unexpected. This season it's expected. Everyone thought Arsenal would be up there. Everyone thought Arsenal would be challenging. Many people had Arsenal as their favourites to win the Premier League. So if Arteta then doesn't deliver, he'll be judged a lot more harshly, and he has been backed very heavily. Not many managers have received the financial backing that he's received, and Arsenal have obviously spent it very well, and they've not made very many bad signings. So that's not meant as a stick to beat them with. But at the same time, when you spend that much money and when you have a British record transfer, you're going to be expected to win things. And obviously, I don't think Mikel Arteta's job is under threat if he doesn't win things. And I don't think there's anyone out there really who can come in and replace him, except for maybe Jurgen Klopp when he leaves Liverpool. But he did say that he's not going to manage an English team again. So, yeah, I don't think there's anyone really that Arsenal would replace him with. But if he doesn't win this season, the pressure will be high, just as it was with Klopp at Liverpool. It's an interesting comparison where Klopp didn't win any leagues, for the first couple of seasons, and was still getting 90 plus points, and Manchester City was setting unbelievable standards, and the pressure was still on him, and that was always a question that he had to answer. And I wonder if Arteta will have to deal with something similar going forward, where no one questions his ability as a manager, and no one questions his tactical nous and his transfer nous and all those kind of things, but that ability to get over the line in the league is ultimately what the top level managers are judged by, and that'll be the same for Arteta, as harsh as that might be.
Yeah, that's the point I was going on, really. I don't think people are judging him on the other aspects of the job in terms of sort of the ability he has to.
Hello, I'm here to annoy you. I'm here to annoy you into listening to more of me and more of others on EPL Index. We don't just have the Anfield Index stuff. We've got EPL Index as well, which covers the entirety of the Premier League. And we have 3 podcasts and a whole bunch of really good writing on EPLindex.com. The podcasts are my own Two-Footed podcast, which is every day at 4 p.m, Monday through Friday, covering the whole league. We have A Tad Predictable, hosted by Tadiwa. You know Tadiwa, he does Anfield Index. He presents A Tad Predictable before every Premier League match week. And then Kevin De Vries and his crew on the EPL Roundtable, they're every week after the Premier League match week. So make sure you listen to everything we're doing on EPL Index and follow us there on Twitter at EPL Index. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Develop players. I think it's when you get to that echelon of the Premier League that you ultimately are judged on getting over the line, and thanks to certain teams that's becoming incredibly difficult to do over the past few years, even when you're performing at such a high level. So bring it to the weekend. Then in Sunday's game, Liverpool already played Arsenal twice this season. The game at Anfield was a really interesting one in terms of the I suppose the difference between the first half performance and then the second half performance, and then the game in the cup. I thought Arsenal dominated large portions of that game without. Well, actually, creating chances, but of course was still in that sort of period where taking chances was a real struggle, and Liverpool just hung in there and ultimately took their chances again. I think the substitutes, as we were talking about earlier on, came to show their effectiveness as well. This weekend feels like a big game. Liverpool obviously top of the league at the moment, 5 points clear at the moment, and I think the same number of games played as Arsenal. Feels like this is a real big game for Arsenal to at home to reassert themselves in terms of their title credentials. And I imagine in terms of the approach that Arteta's going to take, you're expecting it to be a really positive and expansive one, despite the threats that obviously Liverpool have and the fact that they're clearly playing well at the moment.
100%. Arsenal at home in particular, I don't think they're going to carry away from any sort of fight. They played that way against Manchester City when Manchester City came to the Emirates earlier in the season. And to be quite frank, Arsenal kind of need to win this game. I think if Liverpool win it and go 8 points clear of Arsenal at the top of the Premier League, it's very difficult to see Arsenal coming back from that and winning the Premier League, especially with, like you say, that form that Liverpool are in. Liverpool aren't in the Champions League. They've got a really strong squad. Their injured players are coming back. It would look very ominous for Arsenal's title chances if they lose this game. So they need to go at Liverpool. Obviously, they can't go full gung-ho and they can't leave the back door entirely open, but they'll need to take the game to Liverpool, and I expect them to firmly do that. I expect it to be a fast start like it was in that FA Cup game, hopefully with a bit more finesse in front of goal. But yeah, I think that's what Arsenal will do. I think they'll play their game and they'll really take it to Liverpool. And I wonder if we'll maybe see a midfield two of Rice and Jorginho instead of just Rice on his own, just to add a bit more solidity in the middle of the park. But beyond that, I don't think Arsenal will look to go too defensively. I think they'll really look to go for Liverpool.
And what have you made of Liverpool? I suppose over the recent weeks, I think there was definitely some questions about sort of like, I think their credentials, or sort of, I think that still finding an ideal sort of first choice 11, getting the midfield balance right seems to be there now. And actually, despite the fact that Robertson and Trent, amongst others, have been out, obviously there's been great impact from the academy players that have come in, and I think actually one player in particular who I've seen have really good games against Arsenal now the past two games, despite necessarily not always playing in his preferred position, has been Joe Gomez, and I think he's really enjoying this long run of form and fitness. And what have you made of Liverpool? And if I suppose if you were thinking about this game, is there an area where you think that this side is gettable and Arsenal need to be focusing on it?
They're pretty terrifying, and it's interesting. For most of the start of the season, I think Arsenal in particular were looking at the title race, and most people were looking at the title race as a two-horse race between Arsenal and Manchester City, just as it was last season. People were thinking, well, Liverpool are here, but, they're not quite the Champions League winning team that they were a few seasons ago, and they're in transition, and they basically signed an entire new midfield in the summer, and Klopp's having to rebuild, and they're in the Europa League, and maybe they've fallen off a bit based on last season, and Van Dijk's getting on and Salah's getting on, but they kept hanging around the top of the table, and they kept, without really playing that well, hanging around and winning games. And
True.
Now around Christmas, they seem to have found their top gear, and they've started playing well. And that performance against Chelsea on Wednesday night, I watched the game. That was very ominous from an Arsenal perspective, because Chelsea are a mess, and they're a long way off what they used to be, and not a particularly good side at the minute. But the way Liverpool took them apart, and how ruthless Liverpool were with that game, and they could have scored many more than the 4 they did. They absolutely pummeled Newcastle as well earlier in the season. Admittedly, these were all at Anfield, so there's that caveat. But they're an experienced team in big games. They know what they're doing. They've got wily professionals, and they've also got young players who want to prove themselves, and that's a dangerous mix. And obviously the intangible is, how much is Jurgen Klopp's departure going to impact this team, and how much of an extra boost is that going to give them, and how much they're going to want to win it for him. So that's very difficult. Like you say, I think if Arsenal are going to go for an area, it's going to be those fullback positions, and that's where they've had joy in the past. And starting fast is going to be key for Arsenal. And obviously the high press for Liverpool is probably the best in the world, but Arsenal are pretty good at playing out from the back themselves. And if they can play out and get their fast players, Saka, Martinelli, Jesus, going on the counter attack, then they've got a good chance. And twice at Anfield in a row now, Arsenal probably should have been out of sight in the early stages, and they haven't been able to do that. So if they can do something similar, at the Emirates this time around, then they've got a really good chance of getting a really important result. And Arsenal's record at the Emirates is decent against Liverpool. It's not great, but it's decent. And I think last season's game will be a huge factor. And also, Arsenal have been really good at using sort of games where they feel like they've been wronged in previous seasons to motivate them again. So you look at, I don't know, Nottingham Forest, for example, where last season at the City Ground, their Premier League title hopes officially came to an end. They were all in the build-up to that game. That's all the players in the dressing room were talking about. We need to get revenge on Forest. We need to win this game. We need to go. And I wonder if it'll be something similar against Liverpool, where they'll look back to that FA Cup game and they'll think, that was an awful night for us. We need to put that right. And that'll be extra motivation. And yeah, the fullback positions will be big, but I don't really know. It's a very difficult game to call. I think Liverpool are a really, really good side, and Arsenal have their work cut out trying to win them.
Yeah, I think what's interesting to me is, I think to your point, Liverpool hung around there without necessarily playing the best football, and now the best football is starting to come more consistently. I think it's not been a coincidence that's come, I think, when the likes of Curtis Jones has come into the team. I think actually Curtis Jones and Joe Gomez coming into the team has really helped out McAllister and helped him find his feet in that 6 role, which is not necessarily natural to him, but now looks to be really relishing it. The support he gets from Jones and the support he gets from Gomez, but he's played on that side, not being a natural left back and a bit more conservative defensively. I think it's helped him out. So I'm going to be interested to see, really, because we've not had the luxury of Robertson being available, and Trent's been absent for a while as well. Salah's obviously not going to be here for this game. So interesting to see what Klopp does with the fullbacks, given the success we've had with their deputies. And Conor Bradley seems to be on a very interesting journey for himself at the moment, where he can do no wrong. So I'm interested to see the starting lineup against Arsenal, and whether or not Klopp has it in his mind, well, maybe 20 or 30 minutes of like the highest intensity versions of Robertson and Trent is the way to go for now. And I keep on trusting the players that I've trusted so far. I think one player I've just seen this morning, actually, who is a doubt, is the guy who could have probably added 4 goals to that scoreline against Chelsea midweek. Hit the post 4 times. It was Darwin Nunez. I think there's just been an update this morning that he left the stadium in a boot. Nothing's broken. I think some sort of swelling or something like that. So he's a little bit of a doubt. We'll see how much veracity there is to that, or if it's any of these mind games or whatever. But I think your point around the intangible is the point that all Liverpool fans are thinking about as well. Is I'm having been a fan for a number of years. I can't really imagine a better motivational I don't know, elixir to give me than, oh yeah, this guy's going in 4 months. You have to give it everything to try and make it as successful as possible. So we'll see how much impact that can have. I suppose my only worry about that, to be honest, is the closer it gets to the end, the more emotional it will get. And this is an emotional club, emotional side. I just hope that everybody can manage that. I think unless it's clear that Liverpool are in an ascendant position, I think it could be quite a lot to deal with if it's a tight one right before the end of the season. But one final question, I suppose, to wrap things up is just to get your perspective on Klopp. I think I saw yourself and a number of other writers talking about your thoughts on his announcement and maybe the impact it will have on other clubs across the league and managers who are looking to prove themselves as well. So just to finish off, just to get your thoughts on that announcement and I suppose how you think it impacts the league.
Yeah, obviously a huge blow for Liverpool, a huge blow for the Premier League as well, because I think he's made the competition much better, and I've always enjoyed watching Liverpool play, especially with him. I've not bought into the anti-Klopp rhetoric that seems to exist because of his antics on the touchline. I've always found them quite enjoyable, and sometimes he can be a bit prickly with the press, but I think he's a really good manager, a really good coach, and I don't think Liverpool will be able to replace him instantly, and I think that's going to have a huge impact. And we've seen with Arsenal, we've seen with Manchester United, we've seen with so many teams that have had managers who are basically institutions and become the club, that it's very difficult to move on. It's very difficult to get that appointment right first time. Players are much more simple because players can afford to have a couple of off games and you can, swap them in, swap them out. If the manager's not right, then you're in big trouble, especially for a team like Liverpool where the manager is sort of ascended to God status. And that's a really big thing. Getting that next appointment right is almost an impossible task, because who's out there who plays the same style of football as Jurgen Klopp? Maybe Thomas Tuchel. Is he going to lead Bayern Munich? I'm not really sure right now. Beyond that, you're looking at some very difficult decisions. And people talk about Xabi Alonso, but even if he would come in, he plays a very different style from Jurgen Klopp and would need a bit of a transition period to go for. So from an Arsenal perspective, I think like most opposition fans, I was rubbing my hands with joy when I found out Klopp was leaving. Obviously, there was a bit of sadness because, like I say, he's been such a great manager and such a great character in the Premier League. But immediately, there's not much time sentimentality in football, and you move on quite quickly and you start to think, oh, hang on a minute, there's a gap opening up here. And Pep Guardiola will eventually leave Manchester City. He's been there a very long time. And you start to look at teams who could maybe start to dominate the Premier League for years to come. And Arsenal will fancy themselves in that bracket. And Arsenal are in a really good position now. They're above Mikel Arteta. The executive committee is really structured and really stable. Their squad is quite settled. They've got quite a young squad, quite a talented squad as well, but there's not many doubts over the future of many players. Obviously, got a really good manager who's very settled as well. So many things seem to be heading right for Arsenal, and this Klopp announcement does appear to make things a little bit easier for them. However, for this season, it's going to make things a heck of a lot harder. And I do think personally Liverpool will go on to win the league because they're playing some of the best football I've seen in the Premier League this season. I don't think City have hit top gear, and I still don't think Arsenal have hit top gear. And obviously City do that in the second half of the season and they go from strength to strength. But Liverpool have done that too. And I really think Liverpool, without that Champions League sort of distraction, and, obviously they can go on and win a quadruple and they've got a really good squad. But I do think that they'll win the Premier League this season. And I think Klopp's part will be a huge part of that. And yeah, if it wasn't Arsenal who were going to miss out on it, I'd love to see Liverpool win it because it'd be nice to see him end on a high.
Yeah, and from a selfish point of view, having booked everything to go up and see a parade when it did happen, and then not getting that chance to have that emotional outpouring, I'm very much selfishly hoping for that.
Just have to ride on the top deck of the bus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Give Calvin Harris a bell and see if I can get up there with all that. Good. It did look like quite a lot of fun. I'm just touching all the wood around this room just to make sure. I'm going to quash the quadruple talk. Anybody who mentions that word to me is that it doesn't happen. It's not a thing. It doesn't happen because they're the reason why it's so tough. And I think it just when Liverpool did get close to doing it, ultimately ended up falling short in the two competitions that they probably cared about the most, to be honest. So it's but let's see. I think it's going to be a powerful catalyst for the squad, and you imagine it's going to be not many more motivating factors than that. I suppose my one bit of encouragement with the Klopp departure is that he's sort of proving he's left the club in a good state. The squad is there to be picked up and molded by somebody else. They're all of a good age, really. A couple of players who are obviously towards the end of their latter years of their career, but lots of youngsters there. So it feels slightly different to departures of the past. And football's so different from when Wenger departed and when Ferguson departed anyway. So if they get the appointments right, I think above Klopp in terms of the director of football and any infrastructure there, I think that's going to be just as key. And then, to your point, I think it's impossible to replace the man. So going to have to try and find somebody who can withstand the messianic stuff that comes with being Liverpool manager and write their own story. But Kayak, I want to thank you so much for coming on and for giving us your perspective on where Arsenal find themselves this season ahead of it feels like just a massive game this Sunday, and hopefully one that is a really entertaining one as well. So, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
And just to wrap things up, just all those who've been listening into these rivalry cons throughout the season, there will be one more ahead of the Liverpool game against Burnley on Saturday, 10th of February. But between now and then, do check out all the other great content on Anfield Index Pro. And let's hope for a positive result on Sunday.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at AnfieldIndex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Anfield Index and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.
Sports Social Podcast Network.